And while those furloughed workers go back to work, Congress facing the daunting task of passing a long-term budget. Joining us now to discuss this process is Jason Grumet. He is the president of the Bipartisan Policy Center. He joins us from Washington, D.C. this morning. And Mr. Grumet, even though your agency doesn't take sides, when you see stories like the one that just aired where families are hurting, what do you say to both sides about getting the job done?
Well, good morning, Dale. I think, Diane's story captures just one example of the harm that's been visited on the American people over the last several weeks. This was unfortunately a dramatic, but just one of the latest examples of these self-inflicted economic wounds. When the president says there are no winners and the speaker says this isn't a game, it means two things. First, it acknowledges the harm that our federal government has caused to our citizens, right? It's been folks who work for the federal government, it's been veterans, it's been elderly, it's been decent people just trying to take a vacation in the national parks. It's also harmed our economy. The combination of the shutdown and the threatened default, we believe, has probably taken over $20 billion of economic growth away. And the debt default, the risk of that debt default, I think, has also undermined the confidence the world has in the stability of the American economy, which is really one of the critical aspects of our role in the world. So,
and I was going to say, we have been reporting those stories, we have been reporting those numbers now for 16 straight days, and now here we go again. December 13th is the deadline, the day the Democrats and Republicans are supposed to have a 10-year budget plan, and they're supposed to have it in writing. Do you have any hope for bipartisan consensus on a budget?
So, there are some, I think, legitimate reasons for hope, and I'd put them in two categories. First, broadly, one of the great strengths of our democracy has been the ability to evolve to these moments of dysfunction. And I think that the dramatic example of recent harm at least creates the possibility that that cycle is beginning. We'll talk a little more about that. Secondly, I think they've set up reasonable expectations for the next 2 months. Both leaders have appointed good people to the conference. Senator Murray, Congressman Ryan are clearly appropriate leaders of this discussion. I think they have taken both near-term spending cuts and the big long-term changes, entitlement cuts, major tax reform, off the table. And they're focusing on a set of more reasonable, more possible compromises with, I think, the goal of addressing the harms of this sequester, which, while it achieves cuts, it does so in such a somewhat, bizarre and across-the-board way that they're not really in the interests of the country.
So what should they be focusing on? Should they be focusing on deficit reduction, or should they be focusing on jobs, or should they be focusing on both?
So, of course, the answer is both. And there are ideas that have, I think, enjoy a significant majority of support in the Congress. There are some tax loopholes that most people believe are unfair and not efficient. There are things like chained CPI, which I know sounds rather wonky, but it's basically a more accurate way of determining economic growth, which creates both revenue and savings. And these are the kinds of ideas that, if incorporated, would allow us to address and relieve some of the harms of this arbitrary sequester.
Mr. Grumet, thank you very much for being with us this morning. That is Jason Grumet. He is the president of the Bipartisan Policy Center, and he joins us from Washington, D.C. this morning. We are learning right now that not all